Hello again, friends. Randall Nagy here. We left off the last session with VS Code by downloading our project from GitHub, as well as by creating the code.sh file, which allows us to better activate the VS Code IDE, keeping in mind that we simply downloaded the tar GZ to get things running. Getting oriented to the VS Code way of doing business, if used to other IDEs, is truly a unique experience, and part of what makes it unique is the open or seemingly contiguous way we can get things done so as to organize our code. Previously, you see us use a lot of shortcut keys, and of course at the heart of VS Code, unlike other IDEs, is a proud association with the ability to show commands, go to files, find things in files, start debugging with the famous F5 command, or, of course, toggle our terminal mode, or do other things like zoom in and out using Control+ and Control- like we see in many browsers. Now, we don't have much over here in our Function Machines IDE, but as you may recall, the whole idea behind this project was to demonstrate how we can use simple signatures, in this case, create, read, update, delete, search, so as to store the pointers or the function classes in this case to our operations, so that when a user selects the key value, in this case C for create, we would actually execute the create function. Right-clicking on the IDE to run this Python file in the terminal, we can put our program through its paces by scrolling down to the terminal session, entering for create, read, update, delete, search, and finally, of course, the built-in function quit. Using exit as we would expect, the whole point of this demonstration was to show software developers a fast and efficient way to develop and maintain a user interface using Python. While valuable information, the implementation wasn't very useful, so as you recall, our next step was to provide more features. For example, creating a file name that had a .json file type to it, then using the JSON module so as to create, read, update, and delete all of our files without changing any of our implementation logic, indeed even extending the CRUD+S pattern to do a list file operation. Once again, right-clicking on VS Code to run this file. You note that one of the interesting things is that we no longer have to set an active configuration, but in VS Code, unlike other IDEs, the program can often deduce what needs to be done whenever we right-click a program using the program language extension. Supporting even a search operation will allow us to search as well as list multiple files as our heart's desire. Revisiting our application, you'll notice that under VS Code, our information, in this case our JSON file, automatically appeared within our workspace, and because it is a clear text file, we can save our configuration data, run the file again, and then read out our modified information. All is well. In a like manner, whenever we use the VS Code, all of the properties of note at the time of this writing are saved under File, Preferences, and Settings. For example, you'll note here that there is no extra JSON file being created, but if we wanted to toggle an option on or off, for example, change our color theme away from the default dark over to something a little more classic for us, like the Visual Studio .light feature set, we can go ahead and select that after shielding our eyes from the blur, and you notice our settings.json file is automatically created on our behalf. Closing the editor and clicking on the JSON file, we see that things work pretty much the way we would expect, as we just demonstrated in our randall.json file. Starting it again, however, you note that our changes haven't been saved. And the reason why our changes haven't been saved is because there are two places to save our JSON configurations, either in our workspace or as part of our user account. So it is possible here to have different themes for different workspaces. And in addition to saving our editing sessions, when we use Visual Studio, of course, we can also associate different settings with our projects. Now, the interesting thing here is also that when we delete these setting files, of course, we can move our settings to the trash, and sometimes we have to have a restart, and sometimes we don't. So unlike whenever we set up properties in the bowels of other IDEs and we're worried about messing something up because there's just so many options available, the solution in VS Code, of course, is to have all the defaults that are agreeable to most people, allowing ourselves to override either our own preferences or our workspace preferences simply by adding or deleting files. Reviewing the operation again, because it is important and you're probably going to want to make sure you remember where things are. The key to all of our customizations and configuration preferences, both trivial as well as non-trivial, for example, using debug or hook up to the internet, servers, and security, is under File, Preferences, then Settings, and we'll have two options to either use the wonderful automation of this JSON dictionary so as to select our feature sets, or, as we've seen before, directly modify these settings for ourselves. And because these are simple text files, what I like to do is I like to have my own configurations laying about. And when those configurations are laying about, of course, I keep them in simple text files, like for this is just called settings2 in a file I have around my hard drive, so that rather than spending too much time selecting options, I can simply cut and paste the options I want into my workspace or my user settings.json or JSON file. Now, the nice thing also about using JSON files, at least when we are configuring Visual Studio Code, is that the IntelliSense will automatically validate the syntax we have, much like we see with XML. Keeping in mind this has nothing to do with XML, but the JSON file format will allow us to drill as well as manage our options in such a way that we can do standard workbench, standard editor, or even standard telemetry, or the information going back to Microsoft configuration, or even language configurations. In this case, we're going to set up for doing some videos, so we don't want to have autocomplete on. And we also want to make sure to have an extra path rather than using Python path in the environment variable. As we've demonstrated in Python 2000, we simply can add our extra paths here as part of a list, once again seeing the similarity between JSON and Python's notational syntax. Closing our file, of course, we want to save our changes so they'll be around later on. And this time, of course, rather than being trivial, we see that some of the options are deeply integrated into VS Code, so we're going to have to, of course, do a restart. VS Code will automatically pick up where we resumed with, as you can plainly see, all of our options properly in place. Now, part of what I wanted to review with everyone today was the idea that right-clicking is king in VS Code. Even with things that you wouldn't expect to be able to right-click on, we can right-click on, in this case, the Explorer, to hide the sidebar and give us a much larger real estate. Using the Control+ sign to zoom in now, you can see some of the compelling reasons as why you might find it a little difficult to get started with VS Code, but how that difficulty could really pay off by making things a lot easier and more responsive, and certainly more undoable simply by deleting files in most cases, as we've traditionally been used to in other integrated development environments. Another feature I wanted to call your attention to, and this is more of a Python language feature, is the way people have, from time to time, reused the patterns from other storage technologies so as to allow technologies to be interchanged. In this case, you know that we're using JSON, and you'd also note that we're using the load and the dump features from the JSON package. Inspired, however, by serialization, working exactly the same as another data management paradigm, if we wanted to persist the objects we have into a file rather than simply serialize the data, we could instead be using the Python Pickle package. Pressing Control F to search for the occurrence of json in our adv02 file, we see we have 8 occurrences. And if we wanted to replace those occurrences with a new module, a storage technology which allows us to persist our objects, all we have to do is substitute JSON for Pickle. Converting our JSON moniker over to our Pickles, of course, included our file suffixes in addition to a new module, let alone the ability to use the exact same signature or dump and load, and we could also be using dump s or load s so as to write to a data file. And the next thing we have to do is to make sure that rather than writing to a human readable format, and you recall from Python 1000 that we have those two distinctions not only in our data but also in our interpretive versus compiled paradigm, would have to change our file when written to being binary, as well as read from being implicitly in read mode to being, using single quotes just for contrast, read in binary mode. And if we wanted to avoid an exception, of course, would have to make that change everywhere we have read or are going to write a file. Right now we only have 4. And by using the up and down arrow, of course, we can verify that we're no longer writing human readable formats, but binary formats instead. Running our file once again, but this time using a Pickle file format. Listing things, you see we have nothing, although of course we know we have randall.json out there. So we can create a file, list, create another file, list our files, as well as read whatever file we need. Selecting View and activating our Explorer panel as well, you see that, as you would expect, we do indeed have Pickle files and JSON files side by side. And if we choose to open a Pickle file, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a lot of things that we probably don't want to edit unless we're very, very good in using a different editor, but our values is still there. Yet we have information that has been persisted along with our serialized data so as to create objects in formats that are not the same across all Python versions, and more interestingly, are not without having several risks. The nature of those risks when we're using Pickle as opposed to using JSON boils down to simply the fact that we are saving objects rather than simply serializing the data to be restored in well-known data types. For example, choosing to create our own class based upon Python's quite safe dictionary class, if Mr. Evil was located anywhere else besides in our own manageable code area, for example, in a package we've downloaded from GitHub, every time we would depickle or load the file, we would give Mr. Evil several chances to do strange things with our code. For example, upon construction, we can inject evilness in our init function before initializing our superclass, in this case dictionary, We could also override things like our meta or magic methods, where we get something from our dictionary, so as to not only change the values, but also to do something, scan a hard drive, connect to the internet, put out a keylogger, or any other feature whenever we either set or get an item or any one of the other meta methods that are implicitly called by Python, whether we know it or not. Indeed, merely by going in to our create function, and rather than using a dictionary, using something like Mr. Evil, who is based upon our dictionary, we can use the dictionary just as you would expect, easily putting Mr. Evil in place, but unbeknownst to us, giving control to this persisted class whenever we least expect it. Simply doing create, for example, we create our constructor, we assign our values, and entering the name of Evil 1, you can see the problem. Fortunately, and due to the fact that the Pickle module and the JSON module have been designed to use the same contracts or signatures, much like we saw with the CRUD pattern, switching between the load and the dump, or the load S and the dump S, is trivial, and working in reverse, we should probably replace everything we see here, up to and including converting our binary streams back to being text, so that even if we are using Mr. Evil, our data will be serialized as basic strings rather than persisted as possibly very problematic objects. After verifying that we've covered all four, of course, we can run our application, easily go back into JSON mode, read Randall, and see that we are actually having a dictionary, even if we create a new file using Mr. Evil. Rather than seeing all of our evil machinations, you can see that JSON read our human-readable serialized format back into not an instance of Mr. Evil, of course, but into the standard Python dictionary class. All is well.